I was taking a look at this artwork after the recent chapter and, noticed a new parallel. They're both upside down because they were both used in the same way. Gege when I find you. All right, y'all, we're still trucking along through JJK break week, but don't worry, I've got your fix for you. We're going to go through some more questions, but if you're not caught up through the manga, then spoilers beware. All right, so first up from Isaiah here, he wanted to point out a quick parallel in how Geto was taken over by a cursed spirit, and quick point of correction, Kenjaku is not a cursed spirit, he is a sorcerer whose technique just is to body swap like that. But he was taken over and then eaten by the Queen of Curses, and now we have Gojo, who has been taken over similarly. And now what if he is eaten by the King of Curses? And yeah, that would be a crazy parallel that would make this Gojo Geto pairing all the more tragic, right? And we do have this kind of looming threat of Sukuna potentially eating somebody. So yeah, I mean, I could see that happening. Next up, we got this question from Zach, who is essentially asking if I think it's possible Kenjaku made himself into a cursed object first, which is why he knows the process well enough to teach it. And that since Yuta ate Kenjaku, is it possible that Yuta ate a cursed object Kenjaku and Kenjaku could come back via that path? So I want to address a couple things here. First off, at the top you say, is Kenjaku's ability to body hop all that different from Sukuna's? And I do believe those are fundamentally different just because with Kenjaku, it is his curse technique, which the process of turning yourself into a cursed object that he taught Sukuna is not a curse technique. It's just, something he figured out how to do. But I do strongly believe that he only was able to figure that out due to his unique experience of body hopping from his curse technique. So I think that allowed him to kind of, experiment and figure out this cursed object thing, which is then, what he taught to Sukuna and the other incarnated sorcerers, right? But I do think that he could have absolutely done that on himself as well. And that's one of the reasons I think he could potentially come back. Now, whether that means he literally turned himself into a cursed object, which could facilitate this Yuta plan that you're talking about, or just Voldemort Horcrux situation, if he just had, one of his own fingers or whatever it may be, like a cursed object version of himself out there hidden away just as a safety net, I could see something like that too. Next up, Crispy thinks we might get an answer to the question of, are you Gojo because you're the strongest, or are you the strongest because you're Gojo, via this Yuta Sukuna fight. Because Yuta is in Gojo's body and has those abilities now, if he is able to outperform Gojo, or at least, similarly perform, then that lends credence to the answer that Gojo was only the strongest because of his abilities. But if he's not able to do that well, then we know that Gojo was the strongest because he was him. So yeah, I agree here. I think we could get some light shed on that via Yuta's performance, but I am still also holding out for some sort of moment from Gojo in, whatever window we end up getting, where he kind of has that character development as well. But yeah, I totally agree. Whichever way that goes, the haters are going to come out of the woodwork. If Yuta outperforms, then Gojo will get slandered, and if Yuta underperforms, then he is going to get trashed. The Yuta haters are just waiting in the wings for any opportunity to slander him, so we'll have to see what happens. Next up, VTech says, I have a very, 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 very strong feeling that Yuta Gojo will lose and turn into a vengeful cursed spirit, because just think about how much of a monstrosity that will be. Therefore, Yuji and the squad won't be able to defeat it, so they'll have to instead find the source of all cursed energy and eradicate it. So I don't think this would happen, just because in order for that to happen, they would have to be taken out without cursed energy. And it seems like Sukuna would most likely be using cursed energy to deal the final blow in such a battle, but also because of that idea, which I don't hate, by the way, would just more likely be fulfilled by the merger curse, in my opinion, because we still have that looming and it is going to be this monstrosity of cursed energy already. So to introduce this, Yuta Gojo vengeful cursed spirit in the third act kind of out of nowhere, I think would kind of steal the thunder away from the merger, which can basically fill that same role, right? And as far as eradicating all of cursed energy, I do think that is one of two possible outcomes here. The kind of two that were teased earlier in the series, right? Either the elimination of cursed energy or the optimization of it. I feel like one of those two things will be the status quo at the end of this series. Next up, Malthazar wants to know how far I think Hidden Inventory Gojo could make it in the Sukuna Gauntlet, meaning we swap pre-awakened Teen Gojo in for Sukuna right before the Kashimo fight. How far does he go? And Interestingly, in the Kashimo fight, I mean, this is pre-awakened Gojo, which means he doesn't have RCT, red, purple, or domain, right? But he still has infinity, and Kashimo never showed domain amplification, and he doesn't have a domain. So I don't think Kashimo has a way to get through infinity. I don't think the sure hit effect of the positive and negative charges that Kashimo uses would bypass infinity. I know some people think it would, but I really don't. So to me, this becomes a question of who runs out of juice first. Does Kashimo get taken out by his own curse technique, or does Gojo run out of cursed energy? And because Gojo has the 6 eyes, and we're assuming he's at like 100% when he steps into this fight, right? I honestly think Teen Gojo probably takes him, especially given the caveat where you say if Gojo gets taken down, he then awakens. So Gojo basically has 2 lives, right? He's going to get taken down, and then he's going to get red, purple, and RCT. He still won't have his domain, though. So I think he can make it past Kashimo, but then we have Higuruma and Yuji, right? And I think this is honestly where he goes down, just because if we're going to exactly equate it to what happened with Sukuna, then he got the death penalty from Higuruma's domain, right? And Gojo does not have a cursed tool to get confiscated, nor does he have a domain to try and counter Higuruma's domain. So he's going to get his curse technique stripped from him, and now he no longer has infinity. He'll still have the 6 eyes, sure, but I think just between the Executioner's Blade and where Yuji's at, Gojo is going to start looking really rough. And if they can't take him down, by the time Yuta shows up, I think he's definitely going to get cooked, even though you say Yuta can't use his domain. But at that point, we're talking Higuruma, Yuta, Choso, and Yuji all against a Gojo who just had to get through Kashimo and doesn't have a curse technique anymore. So I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on this, because I know I'm going to have at least some Kashimo people very upset at me that I said Teen Gojo could get past him. Next up from Lex here, he says, after sitting on it a while, I'm still not okay with the fact that Gojo isn't coming back, and not just for the love of the character. He's mainly upset because Gojo will never get the chance to tell Megami what happened to Togi. And I understand this. That is kind of a bummer if the story ends and that never gets any resolution. Obviously, Gojo did say, like, Shoko can be the one to tell him about his dad, but I agree that that would be a more poignant moment if it did come from Gojo. But here's what I'll say. There's still a window for that, because I do believe we're going to get something from Gojo, even if it's just a brief kind of takeover, the same way we saw Geto do to Kenjaku. And so maybe he could have some interface with Megami in a domain or otherwise, but I still think there's a slight chance for this. But I would agree that if it doesn't happen, that is a bit of a letdown. Next up, we got a few versus matchups from Alex here, and I'm going to assume we're taking the strongest version of each of these characters. So Gojo versus Mahito, Gojo slams. I actually have a whole standalone video on that matchup if you're interested. Yuta versus Mahito, I think Yuta takes it. We don't know that Yuta can see the soul, and presumably he can't see the soul, so you would think that would mean Mahito would win, but I honestly just think Yuta has so much in his bag that he's ultimately going to take out Mahito, because you got to remember, if Mahito like runs out of cursed energy, he can't reshape his soul anymore, so that defense goes away. Also, if Yuta could completely wipe out Mahito in one go, that's also going to be a win condition for him, right? And if we take the most powerful version of Yuta, and I'm not even talking about Gojo Yuta, but he's got enough tricks in his bag to be able to do things for Mahito. Again, Jacob's Ladder would probably work on this as well, in my opinion. And then Yuta versus Togi, that's tough. That's tough. But again, if we're taking the most powerful version of Yuta that we've seen, I'm going to give it to him. Next up, Edwin also wanted to know a potential matchup, and that is Togi versus Maki, same arsenal, 1v1. And I did talk about this months ago, and I think I gave the slight edge to Maki, but to be fair, I think this is impossible to really say with any confidence because Gege stated them to be equal. Now, I have seen some people say that since Togi was a man, he would have those kind of natural physical advantages and thus have an edge over Maki, but I disagree, again, because Gege stated them to be equal. I think what's in Toji's favor is that he had the heavenly restriction his entire life, so maybe would have more experience and could better utilize it. But Maki has the advantage of, I think, being more motivated. Like Toji was just a degenerate gambler, Maki actually has true motivations to pursue strength, so it's a toss-up. Next up, we got a few questions from Victor here. I'm going to move out of the way. Y'all pause to read the whole thing. But this first one asks, why do people make fun of Hikari? And I wouldn't put too much stock into that. This is just one of kind of the big memes of the fandom, Hikari versus Akotsu, who's stronger. So the two fan bases definitely clown on the other all of the time. So yeah, he's played an important role by taking care of Uraume for sure. Next up, he wants to know that if Yuta had copied Higuruma's curse technique, wouldn't that have been an instant win? Because they could have just used that domain again in order to potentially get the death penalty again or confiscation again. And we don't know that Akotsu copied Higuruma's technique. I mean, presumably you would have think he copied everybody's technique, but Higuruma and Hikari are kind of interesting use cases since their techniques are like bound to their domains. So is that something Akotsu could just straight up copy? Like, could he place Higuruma's curse technique in his unequivocal mutual love domain? Maybe not. So I would say that's the most likely answer for why that didn't happen. But Yuta wouldn't have had to have swapped with Higuruma. In fact, that wouldn't have given him access to the technique, even if they did. He would have had to have copied it by having Rika eat a part of Higuruma. Now, what are the exact specifications on that? I don't know. And if Higuruma didn't know RCT by a certain point, maybe they didn't want to even try that. But again, I think it's mostly due to the fact that those techniques are kind of unique, so they may not be able to be copied in the same way Akotsu can copy other techniques. And then for your final question on, is there a character who passed away early that I wish we got to see fight later on? And for me, that would be Mahito, just because I think he had such insane potential. It would be crazy to see that explored even further if he had survived. Next up, we got this question from Bep. I'm going to move out of the way. Y'all pause and read, but he essentially wants to know Yuji's potential, even though he's being overshadowed by Yuta right now. And I do think that Yuta will fail, so I think Yuji's moment is coming. Don't worry. And as far as Shrine, I made a whole video kind of comparing Yuji's Shrine to Sukuna's Shrine, so check that out. But I think sky's the limit for Yuji. Like, he has insane potential. And as far as his domain, like, what would it be? Could it be Shrine? Could it be blood manipulation? I think it'll be Yuji's own unique thing, and he'll be able to imbue either blood manipulation or Shrine into it. So we'll have to see what he ultimately decides to do. And finally, we got several questions here from Anthony, and I'm going to move out of the way for these, so y'all pause to read them if you want to, but this first one deals with Uro. Her eyes are black. Is that explained? And no, it's not. I think this is just a stylistic choice. And then the second part here just deals with how much of a beast she is, and I completely agree. They had to gang up on her because you can't forget that she was the captain of the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad back in the Heian era, and so that is no joke, right? She is definitely a problem. But is she top 5? I don't think so. There's just so many powerhouses here that I don't think she quite makes top 5, but she's top 10, I would say, for sure. Next up, Anthony wants to know Ogi versus Jogo, Ogi being Maki and Mai's father. Would his flame technique allow him any resistance to Jogo's fire, similar to the Kashimo lightning situation? And I don't think so. I don't think those are quite equivalent, because Kashimo's cursed energy was said to like have an electric property. Nothing of the same was said about Ogi having like a fire property to his cursed energy, right? So I don't think he'd be immune to Jogo's fire or anything, and I think Jogo cooks him, honestly, because yes, Ogi was stated to be keeping up with Naobito, but Jogo cooked Naobito. And yes, he was missing an arm, he was off balance, whatever you want to say, but Jogo's able to heal. Neither of those two had RCT to our knowledge, and Jogo has a domain. Neither of those two had a domain to our knowledge, so I think Jogo just outclasses him. Next up, we got a long one on Yuta. Y'all pause to read, but he's basically saying if Yuta has all of Gojo's stuff, plus all of his own stuff, how is anyone going to beat that, right? So do I think he's doomed to kind of avoid that problem? And I do think Yuta is going to lose. I speak more on this in my reaction to 261 video, so check that out. But I think Akotsu chose the wrong path. He's trying to become a monster, which isn't going to succeed. So I do think he'll lose, and I don't think we'll have an ending where Yuta wins and is now this new monster or anything like that. Next up, a quick shout out to the young Prince Ranta. I appreciate the consistency with the glaze here. And then the main question here is about Yuji, and with his black flashes and the fact that they can restore his output, is he essentially a problem for most people now? Because even if he gets worn out, he can just black flash to restore his output. And I think, yes, I think this is one of the reasons Yuji is becoming such a beast right now. He is built different, but As of right now, he cannot perform Black Flash at will, even though he's making it seem like he can. So up until he actually unlocks that, if he ever does, then he can't just guarantee to always hit a Black Flash to bring himself back up when he's on the edge, right? So while this does make him a beast, he's not quite like functionally immortal or anything. And finally, Anthony asked me about chants. He says, I don't think I've heard you talk about them much. I actually did do a video a while back, and it's titled Why Do Sorcerers Chant in JJK? And I talk about it there, but also there are some comments on that video that do great breakdowns of some of the chants, so would highly recommend that. That's it for this one, y'all. Thank you so much for the support. Don't forget to join the Discord, and thank you for watching.